when I was growing up, you could go anywhere here and get a haddock or a pollock. You could fill a boat with them.
I can remember just as a kid catching fish off any one of these docks down here, mackerel, flounder, harbor pollock.
Not just faded memories from a 100-year-old scrapbook, but recollections of a generation still working.
I've got pictures of them getting the pollock with a pitchfork and loading dories with them.
A little ways offshore on a boat and a hand liner could make a half-decent living. That's impossible today.
It seems that each new generation of fishermen need to search farther and deeper to find enough ground fish to pay them a decent wage.
Clearly one of the things that's changed in the last few years is the serious reduction of ground fish in the Gulf of Maine.
The result is that many who have hunted the seas can no longer make a living at it.
When I was small, it was herring on the coast. Sardine factories were busy. Wares in the harbors here catching the herring. Net, boat going, seiners going. Fishing for ground fish right out of the island on what we call trawls, hooks. And now that's not here.
In a way, fishermen are facing the dilemma of earlier Americans who trapped beaver and hunted buffalo. When the game disappeared, so did their livelihood. To survive, some turned to something they had long resisted, farming and ranching. A similar change is underway now in Maine. A few fishermen have joined with businessmen and entrepreneurs to try their hands at fish farming.
And they have looked upon aquaculture as an evolution of their business. Rather than going out and searching for the fish that they need for market, they're now growing them themselves.
On the surface, aquaculture seems an elegantly simple solution to the decrease in wild stock. You just raise them in pens or on protected bottom, and when they're mature, harvest and sell them. The model is agriculture, and the economic argument is persuasive.
If all the traditional species are exploited, and if there aren't any underutilized species anymore, then something new is needed to keep that economic base, and aquaculture clearly provides that opportunity.
This helps the economy of the state, the community, and the fishermen.
Aquaculture was something that kind of fit into Swans Island. It was a fish that could be grown on Swans Island. It kept people on the water, which is what they really wanted to do.
An ideal solution to balance diminishing resources and lost income. But
we had a meeting on Vinyl Haven to try to determine the site's feasibility for finfish aquaculture, and there was a lot of opposition to it because the people involved were trying to take bottom away from the lobster fishermen to set up this finfish, expedition, and it lost hands down.
Most people in Maine don't know what monoculture net pen fish farming is, and they don't understand the consequences. They don't know that a moderate-sized farm, for instance, can put 1.5 tons of waste into a cove every single day.
The greatest issue surrounding aquaculture now and evolving into the future is the use of public waters that could otherwise be used for pleasure boat moorings.
Shore owner conflict has the potential of being a very significant problem for the development of aquaculture.
so maybe the elegant solution has a downside. Fishermen may resist fencing the range, so to speak, because it might jeopardize their livelihoods. Neighbors on shore wish to protect the character and nature of their community from a kind of industrialization. And friends of the environment raise questions about the impact fish farming will have on coastal waters and wildlife. These competing interests, economic, cultural, and environmental, are shaping the future of aquaculture in Maine. As a citizen of this state, you have a stake in that development. Culturing fish for food has a long history. Chinese writings from 500 BC describe widespread and sophisticated fish farming activities. Aquaculture seems to be almost as old as agriculture and has been practiced in freshwater and saltwater all over the Far East, Middle East, and Europe. In the United States, hatcheries have cultured fish to stock rivers and ponds for many years. What has changed in the past 25 years is that many countries have turned fish farming into a large and lucrative enterprise. European countries alone produce more than 165 million pounds of cultured salmon a year.
I came back to Scotland just to finish my degree and got involved in fish farming there in 1972. And essentially, I guess I started fish farming in Scotland with a handful of other people. And that has now developed into nearly a $200 million a year industry.
Many envision a similar future for Maine. Production has been growing rapidly, and projections are that pen-reared finfish will shortly challenge lobster for dollar value of production.
Outside of Alaska, Maine probably has the most suitable growing conditions for both fish and shellfish in the country. It's got numerous bays, tremendous tidal flow, and tremendous nutrient loading in the water. I think the second thing that people might not think about too often is the proximity to markets, but at the same time a fairly isolated location. That means you don't have a bunch of competing industries fouling the water quality.
Maine waters have nurtured two different types of aquaculture. One grows finfish in pens suspended from the surface. The other seeds shellfish on the bottom, where they grow until harvested.
And the original focus of research in the Sea Grant program, as Maine got into it in 1970, was a project called Culture of Resources in a Cold Water Marine Environment. So our very early effort was to identify candidate species in aquaculture. In other words, what kinds of animals or plants could be raised here in an economic way.
Research and experimentation with species, habitat, and economics has gradually evolved into a mature and viable shellfish aquaculture industry.
With Maine, there's such a variety of coastal inlets and water temperatures. For instance, in Damariscotta, the water gets to be 70 degrees for 4 or 5 months of the year up at our oyster site. 3 miles downriver, it's 60 degrees. And so you have a whole range of temperatures at which you can grow a number of different species of oysters.
At the core of the industry is the hatchery.
We are currently producing somewhere between 70 and 90 million seed a year out of the hatchery per se. And then that seed is either sold or, as I said before, is placed directly into a nursery where we grow it to a larger size before selling it. We begin with carefully selected adult oysters called broodstock. We perform a controlled fertilization of the eggs, place the fertilized eggs into larval tanks. It undergoes a developmental metamorphosis and turns into an oyster.
The seed are then placed in nursery trays in the open water until they grow large enough to survive on their own.
We expect these seed in a good summer to reach at least 1.5 inches in length. Some of the faster growers, the upper end of the growth curve might get to be as much as 50 millimeters or 2 inches.
At that size, the oysters are moved from the nursery and spread on the bottom, where they grow for about 18 months before harvest.
Our production of cultivated oysters is reaching around this past year reached around 150,000 pieces. This plot, if properly utilized, of 20 acres, could produce perhaps 7 to 10 million shellfish, mature shellfish each year for market.
By nature, Shellfish are passive organisms, dependent on moving waters to bring nutrients to them. Raising them is rather like growing vegetables. You plant the seeds, and nature raises the crop. Finfish aquaculture, on the other hand, is more like raising pigs or chickens. Many animals are brought together in a confined area and fed and tended until they are large enough to be sold.
We have a cage site here. It's a 10-acre lease from the Department of Marine Resources that we're growing presently approximately 150,000 fish or so.
One of the first finfish aquaculture operations began in the early 1980s in Cobscook Bay at Eastport. There are now 38 leases in the state, which sent more than 4.5 million pounds of salmon to market in 1990. The seed stock, called smolts, are supplied by Maine hatcheries like this one in Bingham.
Well, we essentially are raising 3 species of salmonids here. Atlantic salmon, Donaldson trout, and Arctic char. We bring in the eggs, hatch the eggs, grow them until they are ready for seawater, and then transfer them direct from freshwater to seawater. The ultimate capacity of this hatchery, and this includes these tanks behind me, will be approximately 2.5 million to 3 million fish.
We introduced the smolts, as they're called, in the spring of the year, anywhere from the middle of April to the middle of May. The smolts average about 1/10 of a pound. There would be 6-inch fish.
The smolts are the fish that went in the spring of this year and will be in the water for 18 months and be marketed next year in October, November.
We put in approximately 100,000 smolts every year, and we try to market as many of those as we can each year. Our target is between 800,000 and 1 million pounds per year.
Compared to oysters or clams, finfish require constant attention. That means feeding.
The fish are fed 3 times a day and sometimes 4 times a day in the peak of the growing season.
Monitoring their health.
We dive twice a week and take up mortalities if there are any. If there is a disease and there's a major amount of mortalities, we'll treat for it.
And maintaining the complex system of pens.
There's an inside net. That's the main containment net. That's what keeps the fish in. Then we have an outside net. If you can see, it's a larger mesh green net on the outside, and that's called a predator net. And that does a fantastic job of keeping seals or otters or cormorants or whatever the predator may be at bay.
Damaged nets can result in fish losses either by escape or attack by seals or otters. Clogged nets can reduce water flow and endanger the health of the fish. Either could be extremely costly.
Just generally speaking, again, what you see behind you, between these 3 sites, there's, at present time, there's an investment of about $2 million here.
Raising finfish is not cheap. Even a small installation of a half-dozen pens will cost over $100,000 just for equipment. Then you add the fish.
There's about 68,000 fish in this site, and smolts go anywhere from $2.50 to $3 a piece.
The food.
At present time, we're feeding about $4,000 worth of feed a day.
And the labor. It's clear that finfish aquaculture as currently practiced in Maine is not the simple family business envisioned in the early days.
Keep in mind that the original intent of the Aquaculture Law of 1972-73 was to provide that this new development, this new business along the coast should really be for small operations, for people with not a lot of economic resources.
Because of the size of investment, most finfish operations are owned by large companies or by local operators in some sort of partnership. Shellfish aquaculture needs less capital and can be practiced on a somewhat smaller scale. On the other side of the coin, however, aquaculture is having a positive impact on the economy of some coastal communities.
A young fellow who's working for me, Brian Terrio, was a graduate from the Marine Trade Center. He's a marine mechanic, and he was working in a boatyard in Connecticut. And he was able to come home and go to work for me.
Most of the people I have, this is the first full-time job they've ever had, probably the best paying, the only one that they've ever had benefits with, and it's made a difference. We've made a big difference in Lubec, a town of 2,000 people.
We have collected about $95,000 worth of taxes from these 10 companies in the last year, and the evaluation of the property that they have is about $3.5 million.
The finfish industry currently employs something like 300 people in actual hands-on at the industry level on the pen sites and in the processing of the finished product.
This is the salmon processing room where we eviscerate salmon and send them for further processing either to Boston, New York, or we do some of it here ourselves in canning. We started 3 years ago. It was probably 3% of our business. Last year it was about 8% of our business. This year it will be about 20% of our business as far as dollar volume goes to the plant.
Just this year, the salmon hatcheries have produced 3.5 million salmon smolts. Well, at a value of about $3 per smolt, there's $10 million of investment that people are putting into aquaculture just this year. Well, if they grow out to market size, an 8-pound fish at $3 a pound, well, you're up to $70 million in a couple of years.
In this upper part of the Damariscotta River, for every 100 acres of bottom planted with American oysters, the landed value of that crop over per year can be expected to exceed $10 million, perhaps as high as $15 million per year landed value of that crop. It's a very high number.
The potential for the future is good. The Maine coast, its water quality, its environmental circumstances, that is to say the physical, chemical, oceanographic circumstances, the fishing traditions of the people, all can support a very substantial development of aquaculture.
But these rosy projections are clouded by concerns about competition for space, water quality, and environmental damage.
The big difference between aquaculture and farming and other onshore farming activities is that the aquaculturist is using a public resource. And that's a key difference, because everyone is entitled, the public is entitled to use the intertidal and submerged lands area. It's not private property.
Many people see that aquaculture is a way to boost the local economy using the working coast again, or reviving the working coast. The downside of that is that in using a public resource, inevitably there arise conflicts of interest or competing uses.
To raise fish or shellfish, you need to lease lands from the state. Once leased, the area is closed to intrusions by other users. This means fishermen cannot drag the bottom. Boaters have to divert around surface equipment and cannot moor craft there.
There's more and more pressure to build marinas, and then if there's more than 10 boats in an area, that area is automatically closed for shellfishing because there may be fecal bacteria in the water which can accumulate in the shellfish.
Permanent closing of potential seedbed areas to accommodate recreational boaters could be a severe limitation on growth in shellfish aquaculture.
There are several questions. Whether or not the river can support 100 acres of oysters being grown, and my feeling is probably it could support several hundred acres from a biological point of view in terms of the available food and so forth. The second question, which is probably more likely to be a limiting factor in aquaculture, is the political question of whether that much public resource should be or could be devoted to aquaculture.
The dilemma is, what attracts aquaculturists also draws boaters, tourists, and owners of shore property. With finfish, the conflicts are similar but more intense. In some places, it's about fishing grounds and tradition.
This was a Norwegian company that was going to come in and take over their bottoms, which they'd been fishing for 200 years, and say, well, we're going to put this salmon farm in here and produce salmon and sell them on the world market and take home millions of dollars in profit. And what you're basically going to do is lose your bottom, and that caused a lot of conflict.
In other places, it's about the neighborhood. For a quiet residential area, the busy, sometimes noisy activity of a working fish farm might be jolting for local residents. And the residents may not all be human.
I think there are larger, more important, more basic considerations than that, which are biological considerations. And, you know, an eagle that depends on this bay should not be forced in a position, as an endangered species, of having to defend itself against an interloper who comes in. An eagle is an estuary on wings. Everything it eats comes out of this bay. Every single scrap of food, every molecule in its feathers comes out of Taunton Bay. It is literally Taunton Bay on the wing. And once you grasp that, this bay belongs to that eagle, not to us people.
Another concern is that pen-raised salmon might interbreed with wild salmon and weaken wild stocks. It has happened in Europe, though currently pen stock and wild stock are basically the same strains from the same hatcheries in Maine. But the most urgent challenges to finfish aquaculture center on the potential damage to the coastal waters of the state.
Net pen fish farming is a large-scale monoculture in which very large numbers of finfish are kept confined in relatively small spaces.
Well, the big problem with finfish, if you want to put it that way, is the fact that you have to feed them very large volumes of organic material. Some of that is eaten by fish. That which is eaten by fish, some of it is digested, and some of it is defecated. What this does is it adds to the sediment concentrations of material that the animals that are living there, normally living there, are not used to. The impact of this is that they are overwhelmed with food. In some cases, this results in the smothering of animals. In other cases, it results in a significant alteration of their habitat. Depending on the environment in which the pen is placed, the impacts may not always be that severe, because some of these impacts could be mitigated easily by hydrography, by the waves and currents, seasonally by storms.
20-foot tides in Cobscook Bay are a major reason for the growth of aquaculture in that area.
It is that it acts as a natural flushing system to move feces and feed from the pen areas and disperse it pretty fast. And that's important for environmental considerations.
I don't think you'll see much enrichment in a site like this one because of our currents. We have videos of it, and it shows just a rippling effect in the gravel and the sand, which means that there's a great scouring effect as the tide goes across the bottom. Obviously, anything can be overdone, but if we use good judgment, that won't be a problem.
But others feel there should be better guarantees.
When industry has the opportunity for impacting the environment, then we as citizens had better keep watch, understand what's going on, and try to come up with thoughtful, reasonable, appropriate regulation and public oversight to protect what belongs to all of us, in this case, the coastal ocean waters of the state of Maine.
We are extremely dependent on clean water for our organisms. Fish are used as environmental indicators by the Environmental Protection Agency. They happen to be some of the most sensitive organisms in the world to their environment. To allege that we are going to be able to pollute our environment and still stay in business raising fish is, to my mind, ludicrous.
But severe bottom impacts have occurred in Norway, Scotland, and other countries. And some people argue that the state should adopt strong requirements for locating pen sites.
The state of Maine has developed what I would call a very minimal
set of guidelines. They're certainly not up to the standards that we see for the state of Washington or for the province of British Columbia.
While arguing that formulas evolved for the deeper, slower-moving waters in Washington state shouldn't be used here, growers do agree that there needs to be some standard.
I think when you're applying for an aquaculture lease, there's a certain criteria that should be met, and basically the depth of water, the amount of current, the flushing action you get from the current, the water temperatures and things like that. I don't think you can set up an operation like this just anywhere. I think you have to be very, very selective.
To be selective, you must have precise criteria. For this, you need data.
The aim now is to develop the information that's needed to ensure protection of the environment and to do it in a way that allows aquaculture to develop as an industry.
Part of that information will come from monitoring aquaculture sites. But now a study directed by scientists at the University of Maine's Darling Center has begun to examine the impact of sediment falling from cages.
That's a major study that the Innovation Center is currently coordinating. But the whole concept is to try and figure out how to develop a predictive computer model that can be applied to various locations that finfish interests want to site their operations in. And the predictive model would simply be used in order to assess those sites prior to locating a farm on them.
So the search for regulatory balance between economic benefit and environmental impact continues.
You grope your way through this process, and it's people on both sides and the tension between the two sides that eventually creates the regulatory system.
As we have seen, aquaculture can bring a valuable new industry to areas hurt by the shrinking wild fishery. The conflicts over space, competing uses, and above all environmental damage must be seen as part of the continuing process where people of goodwill work to make fair and equitable policy.
We have priceless marine resources and a priceless coastline and an ocean that nobody would be able to set a value on, and we ought not to play fast and loose with it.
There's controversy, there always will be, but the two can meet and work it out. They are compatible. We can't rear fish in a bad environment. They die.
I just feel that it's a shame that we haven't taken better care of our natural resources. Aquaculture is good in its way, that we have it, and I think it's important, especially to the economy of our island. This gives the young men and the people another alternative, which we had in the past with the other fishing industries.